time to rethink, renew, and reimagine retirement. Welcome to Retire Repurposed. This podcast is dedicated to help people transition into fulfilling and purposeful retirements. Retirement is a big life change. In fact, the two most dangerous years of a person's life are the year they were born and the year they retire. We believe that retirement is not the end, rather the beginning of what could be the most impactful season of a person's life. So don't retire, become repurposed. Well, I'm your host, Jared Sebest. I'm the co-founder of Retire Repurpose alongside Ben Tages. Thank you so much for joining us today. Maybe you found us online. Maybe you're listening to us on the radio. Regardless, head over to iTunes, find our podcast, click subscribe, and better yet, leave us a quick positive rating and review. If you would just take a moment and do that, we would appreciate that so much. Now, this podcast is all about retirement, but it's not about money. It's about the non-financial parts of retirement, which many times can be even more challenging than the financial. Few people could just flip the switch from working a career 30, 40 plus years, saving for retirement, having an identity and purpose in work, and then shutting it off without living a repurposed retirement. If you want more for your life and your retirement, then you have come to the right place. Well, on this episode, we continue our series on optimizing retirement. Today, we talk about reverse engineering your retirement to be the most optimal and most prosperous. Remember, the definition of prosperity is the extent to which you are living in alignment or congruent with your purpose and calling. It has no definition based on financial means. In this podcast, we pose 3 questions that will make you consider the most important factors to reverse engineer your retirement into the most impactful and regret-free life possible. Enjoy this episode. All right, welcome back. Jared Sebest here. Thank you so much for joining us on the show here today. We're going to continue our series on optimizing retirement, and this may be the last episode that we have in this series. We're going to kind of wrap it up today talking about how to reverse engineer your life to really encapsulate everything that we've talked about in the last several shows. So we're so glad that you're listening here today, and again, thanks for joining us. Before we get started, just a reminder, we got a brand new Facebook group called Becoming Repurposed in Retirement. If you're on Facebook, head over to Facebook, search Becoming Repurposed in Retirement. You're going to see a lot more content. In that group, you're going to see Facebook Lives, Q&A sessions with Ben and myself. So make sure you head over there and search Becoming Repurposed in Retirement. This is a private group. And again, it's specifically for people like you listening to our show who want more than just kind of the average American dream, retirement. Ben Tages joins me on the show here. And Ben, this is now, I think, the 8th episode. This started way back about 2 months ago, where we brought up this idea of the ant and the grasshopper, and that has led into kind of show after show of saying there's a different way to live. There's certainly a way that it's been kind of portrayed that this is kind of the way that you do life, and this is how you walk into retirement, but we're suggesting that there's probably a lot more to this story than just one way.
Yeah, a lot more, and our heart behind this message and our heart behind why we wrote the book Repurposed and why we're talking about this is because we do not believe that a bad day of fishing or golfing is better than a good day of work. Mm-hmm. We do not believe that in that. We believe that, hey, we've been working our whole lives, and many of us go into retirement now, and you start to think, I'm looking forward to all of this leisure time. I'm looking forward to that. And when it starts to let people down, and when those days are not quite what they thought they'd be, I've had clients tell me, man, I kind of wish I could go back to work. And that's because, not because they shouldn't have retired, but probably because they're doing it wrong.
Yeah, I think, again, the way that retirement is portrayed, and we've mentioned this on the show, if I'm winning in retirement, that means I have the ability to basically do nothing. And to me, and I've argued this point on blogs, and again, if you're part of the Facebook group, we've talked about this, and I've done videos on this, that's not winning. Now, is there more leisure? Is there more relaxation? Is there less stress? I'm sure all of the above. Are those things bad? Absolutely not. But when your goal is, hey, Now I can do whatever I want, whenever I want. And if that means do nothing endlessly, then I'm winning. Then that's a problem. And that's what we're going to start to bust as we go throughout the show here today. We've had several episodes on how to optimize, how to find meaning, how retirement is more than just a numbers conversation. That's a big one. We talked about the values of memories. Last week, Ben, we talked about this idea of prosperity. There's definitely a way that the world defines prosperity, but then there's a way that we define it. Let's talk about that for folks that missed last week's show.
When I look at what the world would say, right, prosperity is almost always material. I mean, we're talking about finances. We're talking about having success, wealth. I mean, you have, money, you have possessions, whatever that is. And we know that true prosperity goes way beyond financial means. It goes into living with an incongruency with who you were created to be by your Creator. So I think when we start to listen too much and follow too much with what the world says, that's when you get to that definition that we know doesn't bring happiness.
Yeah, we use the word alignment a lot, where you're living in alignment with how we're created, and people that do that or live like that, they tend to be the ones that are the most happy. And contrast that to what the world says, that it's all about wealth and success. There's no correlation to that. We find people that have tremendous wealth that probably aren't the happiest or the most prosperous, and people that maybe don't have the bank accounts but live tremendously fulfilling lives. But the world wants to put those on the same playing field, and they're not the same thing.
Yeah, and there is no correlation, like you said. I mean, there's some of the wealthiest people and some of the poorest people, and one of them can be very happy and fulfilled, and the other not, and it doesn't have anything to do with money. I think the psychologist Martin Seligman, if you remember him, and I wrote about him in my book Repurposed, but he kind of started to break that myth. I mean, his entire work has been trying to look at what makes people happy, what makes them content. And one of the things that he's very clear on, and I tend to agree 100%, is that if you're finding happiness out of possessions or money, you will never arrive. The goalpost moves every single time. It's a term that we look at and talk to clients about all the time. It's when we're looking at a financial goal, and if that's going to bring us contentment or happiness, you will never reach it, because you will get there and the goalpost will move. Right. You'll get there and it'll move again. So we know that in order to find happiness, it goes way beyond financial means and into service and being tied into something that's bigger than yourself.
What's interesting is that this is the perfect message for folks, entering retirement or retired, because when you're younger, it's all about building. It's maybe building a career, and then something happens, in the second half of life, where life becomes less about the financial success and more about significance. We've talked about that. If you're listening to this and you're over the age of 50, you probably, whether you would articulate it like that or not, probably sense that you may have had some success in your life, financial or business or whatever, but then something starts to shift. And some people would even call it like the second mountain. You've kind of climbed the first mountain in life. You've had some success, but having that purpose, really, that's what it comes down to. The irony in this is that if you're living in alignment with how God created you to live, you're probably having a lot of impact. You're providing a lot of value. The way that people are compensated for adding value is monetarily. Doesn't happen every time, but there is some alignment there. But usually the purpose is what comes first, and that's what helps bring that idea of prosperity and fulfillment. So that's a little recap. If you missed last week's show, very interesting stuff. Again, we really broke down this idea of prosperity and what that means, and that is a great segue into today's show. Ben, we're going to talk about how do you reverse engineer this? Like, how do you actually put this into play? Talked a lot about a lot of concepts to say, hey, this is some good stuff, but how does that actually play out in the lives of people? What are some takeaways that they can have? And that's what we're going to cover in today's show. Let this be kind of our motivation. We mentioned Taylor Welch. Taylor Welch is a guy that I found. He's a young guy. He's like 33, had many successful businesses, but I heard him on a podcast not long ago, and he said this: He said, our greatest contributions to the world and around us are made during the happiest and most blissful moments of our existence. Therefore, we have a moral obligation and duty to engineer those moments as frequently and as routinely as we can. Ben, he's going out on a limb and saying not only should we do this, where we engineer our life in such a way that we have the most impact, we're the happiest, we're the most blissful, we have a moral obligation to do that. Can we make that declaration here on the show?
Well, yeah, and I think that's probably your first step. Like you said, if you reverse engineering, optimizing retirement, I think your first step in doing that is just realizing that you have something to offer, and that if you don't act and you don't do something, people will miss out. I think the best motivation many times is looking at what's the world going to miss out without what you're going to do. We've all been created for different things, and there are things right now, if you're listening to this, that you were created to do. And if you just don't do them, right, the world's going to miss out. Just the other day, Jared, I was with one of our clients and visiting with her about kind of their retirement, how it's going. And I could tell something was different with her this meeting. She was very upbeat, and it was such a fun meeting. And she said, "Do you want to hear about my newest venture?" I was like, well, of course. I always love hearing about what people are doing in their retirement. And she shared with me that they've got this 4 to 5 year old Labrador Retriever dog that is a great dog. And she's like, always been thinking about doing hospice care with the dog hospice care. And she's like, this dog could make a big difference in some people that are nearing the end of their lives. And she said, I'm retired, I got time now. She actually took this dog in and said, I'm just going to do the hospice training and just see. And the dog did phenomenally well. And this client is looking forward to with great expectation going in and seeing people that are near the end of their lives and spending time with them, making a difference for them. And she's not getting paid for this, anything other than the smile on their faces. And seeing this dog, meet its purpose, and for her, kind of her own repurpose, and coming up with just something so different from what she did while working her career. And to me, it's like, what motivated her at some point. She always had thought about doing something like that, but she actually said to me, she said, Ben, I just thought of the people that, right now that's a need in our area. Right. And in a couple of our local hospitals and local nursing facilities, they don't have that available to them. She's like, those people will miss out on this if I don't do it. Yeah. And now she's going ahead and doing it. It was a really fun meeting to hear what she's doing. But again, it started from her saying, what's the world going to be looking like for those folks if I don't make a step forward and do this?
Yeah, that's a great question to ask yourself. And I always find it interesting, just even that story as an example, that is such a, if you juxtapose that scenario versus what the world tells you retirement should be all about, it's like a polar opposite. And that's what we're trying to get at here with this idea of engineering your life.
Yeah, if you look at what the world would say, why? Right. Why go down to the nursing home?
Do all the work.
Why? Your dog seems perfectly comfortable. Right. You're fine. Pet the dog, sit there and relax, go on walks, do that. But this made it more purposeful. And again, if you want to talk about happiness and contentment, I know for a fact she's going to feel more of that because she's already been doing some of these visits already, and she is feeling so much better about her time and what she's doing because there's a purpose there. There's something greater than herself that she's being tied into. And that also balances out really well with making sure she can still vacation, still do all the fun things that she's always been able to do, and actually makes that time better because she looks at, hey, now I can leave and do that and feel better about what I'm doing.
Taylor Welch goes on to say you should engineer your life in such a way where the exertion of energy is pleasurable. I can imagine this lady that you're talking about in this example is experiencing a ton of pleasure about this. But, again, as we kind of lead into just some of our talking points here today, if retirement is looked upon as your way out, you got to take a much deeper look at how you're living. You've said this a number of times on the show. If you're unhappy while working, you're going to be unhappy in retirement. The fact of just pulling work out of the equation doesn't simply change the condition of your heart. And again, this kind of goes back to what we've been saying, but if you have to escape your life in retirement, then it's time to take a pretty significant look in the mirror and say, what am I not doing? How have I not engineered my life in such a way where I have to now have this escape of retirement to get out of this mess?
Yeah, and I think it actually get worse. If you're living this life that isn't going particularly well while working, and then you remove that, you'd be shocked how many people I talk to who think, oh yeah, there was a positive aspect of work, and it wasn't as bad as I thought, and now I'm in retirement, and I'm filling my time with more, and I'm going to call some of that stuff more selfish ambitions, things that do fulfill in the short term, but don't give me that impact to society, impact to people, impact to my community. If I'm losing that work did provide, the community, etc., and now I'm somewhat isolated and focusing more on my own hobbies, I think you can actually find that
it's worse.
It actually gets worse making your choice. So we're big proponents. Like if you're listening to this and you're not retired and you're not feeling very fulfilled and happy,
work on it now.
Work on it today.
Now, exactly.
Right now is the time to do it.
Yeah. Again, it's a scary feeling when you've played your ace in the hole of retirement. And this is the thing that's going to fix a lot of things. And holy cow, it doesn't. Boy, that's a helpless feeling where you thought that the thing was going to make you fulfill you, and the thing all of a sudden doesn't. That's another great word. So 3 questions to kind of ponder with this idea of reverse engineering in such a way to really live a prosperous life and a prosperous retirement. The first one is consider your worst case scenario. We brought this up last week, but there's a lady by the name of Bronnie Ware. She's Australian. She wrote a book called The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying. She worked in a facility that we would equate to basically hospice care here in America. But after she spent, I think, 7 or 8 years working with people bedside, she wrote this book called The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying. The very first one, the most common regret that she saw working in this facility is she said, I wish I had the courage to live the life true to myself, not the life others expected of me. That's a big one and a sobering reminder of how we're living today. We got to have the end in mind. We'll talk a little bit more about that with our second point, but the second thing that she mentioned was, I wish I had not worked so hard. And she also mentioned that every single male that she worked alongside in this facility, every single one of the guys said that before they died. And again, that's a sobering reminder as well.
Sounds like a pretty strong statistic that 100% of people had that regret, of men that had that regret. And I'm guessing women, the same thing. It's like if we prioritize work, and again, work's great, but if it's the priority to earn more, to get more, there will come a time where that will end up looking like a regret.
There's a book that, Ben, you and I both read earlier this year. It's called Die with Zero by Bill Perkins. I highly recommend. Not a Christian book for those of you listening to the podcast, but highly recommend it. Very thought-provoking read. So go check it out. Die with Zero by Bill Perkins. But one thing that he said in there is he goes, it's crazy to live in such a way where you think you're going to die tomorrow. That's just not a realistic way to live. But it's also crazy to live in such a way where we think you're going to live forever. So the reality is that everybody listening to the show, we're going to perish at some point. So to not have the end in mind on how we're living today is foolish. Ben, you and I are both middle-aged. Our wives have probably said we've gone through midlife crises at times.
But are in one right now.
Or possibly in one right now. But the reality is that once you get to a certain age, you start to realize, like, holy cow, I've only got a finite amount of time left on planet Earth. And if I don't start making changes today, they may not happen. And that's a scary place to be.
Yeah, it is. I think when you see things slipping away, that comes up to mind. So, all of a sudden your daughter's 17 and like we've talked about in the last couple episodes, like all of a sudden she's busy and she's leaving the house and she's working and she's at school, and then they go to college, and you want them to do that, but you start to realize did I spend enough time? Was I there enough? Did I work too much? Did I prioritize the wrong things at times? I have to answer that several times a day. I think about that, and I know there's times where I have done that, and I don't want a retiree to get into those later years of life and think as they see life kind of slipping away, right? The time's getting shorter, and all of a sudden think, man, I wish I hadn't worked as much. And I think that's a kind of a sobering reminder.
Again, identifying your worst case scenario, that could be first step in really engineering your life and understanding that you have something to do about it right now. If you're breathing air still and listening to this podcast, there's something that you can do to reverse engineer this process so you can eliminate that regret someday down the road. The second question to ponder is, who do you want to be? Another way to answer that question or ask that question is, who did God create you to be? And this goes back to this idea of being versus doing and having an idea that we touched on last week's show.
Yeah, I can say with certainty that I don't believe God created us to just sit around and enjoy, just to have a life of vacation. If that is how we're living today, I hope I don't touch too many nerves, but if that is indeed how you're living and you say retirement is now my time, and I'm just going to vacation all the time, without purpose, without impacting your community positively, your family, without continuing to add value to others, I don't think you're living who you were created to be. In fact, I know you're not.
Right. Yeah. This idea of be is really interesting because I've read in several books, a lot of people think that they have to have the right things in their life. Maybe that's money, maybe that's job. And once I have those things, then I can go and do the things. I can go do the vacations and do all these things I want to do. And because of that, I become the person I want to be. And I've heard it said, the actual way to look at this is in reverse order. We become the person that God created us to be. And as a result, we're going to do the things that God created us to do. And even as a result of that, we end up having the things that we were kind of supposed to have. So we've got to look at it in that context. If you're not living where you want to be right now, whether you're retired or not, again, you have a conscious choice to become that person now. You don't have to wait until someday when you have the certain things in place.
And there needs to be a sense of urgency. You need to do it now.
Right.
Like we talked about earlier, the people are missing out. I believe that if you are not walking into this fullness into retirement and you're not walking into who God created you to be and continuing a life of service and balancing that out with rest, yes, but doing things for others while retired, I think you need to get back to that sense of urgency and step up and make a difference for somebody else.
So reverse engineering your life so you have the most prosperous life, the most fulfilling, the most optimal life in retirement. Consider what is your worst case scenario. Consider who is it that God created you to be. And lastly, and not certainly last but not least, is who do you want to impact? When you're working, chances are when you've been working hard, you've had a cause or somebody in mind. That does not change once you retire.
No, in fact, it continues work that you've already been doing. So in our work that we created with the Repurposed University, Jared, together, it's a great course that allows people, in fact, to not only discover kind of what types of talents and skills that they have, but there's a part in that section in that lesson where we talk through your who, where we have people specifically look at who in your life are you most able to impact, and who are you called to make a difference in? Sometimes people come back with it's their family, their community. Sometimes it's an entire people group. But when we do good work, there's almost always there's a goal in mind. There's a person in mind. There's a people group in mind that we're trying to impact. If you can really hone in on who that is and who God's placed on your heart to serve, and then you combine that with who you are and the talents that you have, that's how you walk into fullness.
Well, I sure hope you enjoyed the conversation on reverse engineering your retirement. This idea of becoming or being is something that we've talked about on the show so many times, but I feel like it's really, really important because living with purpose and having prosperity, which is being in alignment with your purpose, does not start once you retire. You can live and be someone for decades, but if you think you can just flip a switch because you're no longer working in retirement and you're going to be somebody else, that just does not add up. I think so many times people think that their life is going to be drastically different because they retire and remove work out of the equation, but it does not work that way. But the good news is that you have a choice. Becoming the person God created you to be and living in alignment with that can start right now, regardless of your age. In fact, the earlier the better. We recommend you start doing this right now, even if you're still working, because making that mental shift later in life, once retired, it gets harder and harder. But you have the choice to start that process right now. Want more help? Check out Repurpose University. It's a 5-lesson class taught by Ben Tages and myself. Or you can get a copy of Ben's book, Repurpose: The Untold Story of Retirement in America, by going to our website, retirerepurposed.com. Until next time, I'm Jared Sebesta. Remember, don't retire, become repurposed. We'll see you then.
Securities offered through Avantax Investment Services. Member FINRA SIPC. Investment advisory services offered through Avantax Advisory Services. Insurance services offered through an Avantax affiliated insurance agency.